knew that I'd be okay because I was going to be on the programme that night with our next guest, who's going to address you now, Caroline Sands.
Only time RTE let me on during the entire campaign in relation to the referendum. There you go, we did our best. I have thrown together very quickly a little bit of a PowerPoint just to go through some of the main points. We are now in a post-8th Amendment country, and we are looking at a very different horizon, and we're looking at very different practice of medicine. And there are a lot of things we're going to have to look at. One of the ladies in the audience here very kindly brought my attention to a report in the BBC about 18 hours ago. Practical impacts of what it is we're about to embark on as a medical healthcare service. BBC has reported that hundreds of tons of human body parts and medical waste is piling up after a disposal company working for the NHS has struggled to incinerate it. Government confirmed the waste had not been properly disposed of by healthcare environmental services. Anatomical waste is stored on sites in secure and refrigerated containers, etc., etc. They don't tell us what kind of anatomical parts there are, but you can imagine some of them will include anatomical parts from the services which our health department is now going to roll out. So I'm to take on the next one there. Where are all of the protagonists gone from the campaign? Peter Borden, we've been told last week, has been appointed by Simon Harris to assist in making sure that the legislation is implemented and rolls out. Our next person, Simon Harris, of course, who told us back in March and from then on that there would be ample time to debate the content of the legislation, who assured us that the people were not voting on any legislation, that the legislation was merely hypothetical, he said, until such time as the 8th Amendment was removed, is now resisting firmly any amendment whatsoever of the legislation. And that seems to be the position in Fianna Fáil as well. I understand that one of the TDs has responsibility for being, if you like, the filter through whom all amendments will come, and they're not going to tolerate any that will, in any substantial way, affect the impact of this legislation. And of course, this is the mysterious, I'm calling her mysterious because I never came across her until the very end of the campaign, Deirdre Duffy, who appeared on Marion Finucane's programme with me and a number of others on the day after the count. And she is a barrister who was the manager, the campaign manager for Together for Yes in the final 3 months, and is now joining Pascal Donoghue, running on the Fine Gael ticket in Dublin Central in the general election. I hope those of you in that constituency will do all you can to resist her election. I'm thrilled to see you all here in so many numbers, and as always, I welcome those people from the Together for Yes campaign who no doubt will be tweeting about what I have to say now or later on in the afternoon. So, what happens now? Well, the newspapers have been telling us a little bit about what happens next, and actually they've been very disingenuous and dishonest, quite a lot of them, in what they have published. They still perpetuate the myth, the lie, in fact, that there will be no late-term abortions. And they still report, as Simon Harris has said, that there's effectively a ban on late-term abortions. There is no such thing. There is no prohibition on late-term abortions in the government's draft legislation whatsoever. And in fact, back in March in his speech in the Dáil, Simon Harris made it absolutely clear that the intention of the government was that there would be no time limit for abortions where there was a so-called fatal fetal abnormality and also where there was an emergency. And remember that up to this point, where there have been emergencies, doctors haven't gone in to deliberately end the life of a fetus. They have gone in to end a pregnancy, a very different thing. This legislation is only dealing with ending the life of the fetus. So, if you go to the next one now. Some of the things that we're now being told that were being denied during the campaign, we now know that in the first, thanks very much, it's Joseph Brantley, aren't they wonderful here, our techie guys? As I was saying, there's a twin thing going on in our house too, so I really appreciate it. Anyway, some of the things we were told weren't going to happen. We were told that this legislation specifically prohibited, again, abortion on the grounds of disability. It does no such thing. And the doctors involved in the campaign and Together for Yes know and said and made clear that All of these things would be caught in the non-invasive prenatal testing. That is, the blood tests that can be done at 9 weeks of pregnancy by taking some blood from the arm of a woman. There's enough fetal DNA going around in the mother's bloodstream to tell them a huge number of things, including if the child has Down syndrome, the sex of the child, and a whole lot of other chromosomal abnormalities. So there is no doubt about it. Women will be able to have this information. At the moment it's available privately for anywhere between €300 and €500. I'm not sure if the government envisages that this will be made available on the public health service, on your taxes and mine, probably will. But this information will be available, and there is no doubt in my mind that it will be used to target the disabled. And it's rather peculiar to see that report and then an ad on the other side, the Party Progressing Equality with Disabilities in Ireland. There's a contradiction there, I think. So, see the top one there? This is Sunday Business Post. Very interesting. Decisions must be made on feticide, say doctors. You weren't told anything about feticide before the referendum either. Feticide is carried out by recommendation of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in cases where the pregnancy has reached 22 weeks in the UK. And the reason for this is because they wanted to avoid the kind of situation that was reported in 2005 where 66 babies survived National Health Service abortions and were left to die. Very distressing for the medical staff, very distressing for the mother. So in order to avoid that, a green top recommendation was brought in which said that you inject poison into the heart of the baby that will cause it to have cardiac arrest and die before you do the abortion. It's terribly skilled work. Sometimes the injection only goes into the amniotic fluid, in which case it takes a lot longer for the poison to get to the baby's heart and cause the heart attack. It is a very painful thing, and there is huge debate about whether or not the baby can feel pain. And needless to say, on both camps of pro-life and pro-choice, you can imagine the way that debate falls. But let me tell you this from personal experience. When I had my first child at 30 weeks to save my life, a long time ago, babies at that point, when they were born prematurely, were put, as she was, on ventilators, and they had all kinds of difficulties, and they weren't given painkillers at that point because it wasn't appreciated that the premature baby feels pain much more acutely than we do. In fact, up to 4 times more acutely. Today, when a baby is born that prematurely, they're given a low dose of morphine in case any intervention has to be made. So, for instance, today, when my oldest child had a pneumothorax, when the ventilator burst a hole in a lung which collapsed for 11 days and she was put in a ventilator, now, instead of just shoving the rod through her rib cage with all the pain that involves, they have a low dose of morphine. Babies feel pain. The most recent research that I have found, papers published in 2017 and 18, indicate that certainly from 18 weeks gestation, you should be thinking, from 18 weeks age of the unborn baby, you should be thinking about pain killing. Some doctors say excuse me, that the final connections between the brain and the pain receiving area aren't made until a little bit later, but we don't know in what way pain is experienced as an emotional thing at that point. And we can't rule out the possibility that it is that. And for that reason, in 18 states in the US, they have brought in legislation outlawing abortions after 20 weeks, and they call it pain-capable legislation, or fetal pain-capable legislation, to protect the possibility of the fetus feeling pain. And in Utah, this year, a law was brought in to insist on painkillers to be given to a baby at that stage too. Now, none of this is addressed whatsoever in our legislation. And there will be doctors who will argue and have written that babies are kind of in a sleep, kind of catatonic state until they're born and don't feel anything. But the scientific research certainly raises a serious doubt, and any responsible, compassionate, pro-choice or pro-life person must, I think, allow for the possibility that pain might be felt and deliver an analgesic or an anaesthetic to the baby in order to avoid the pain being felt. Preferably they should be letting the pregnancy advance further than the baby be born. But if they're going to go through with this barbaric procedure, then you wouldn't do it to animals, you shouldn't do it to babies as well. Next one, please. So feticide is being talked about here. Dr. Keane O'Donoghue, you can see there, is quoted, said that if you did do feticide after 22 weeks, this would likely lead to live births following termination of pregnancy at later gestations, as not all babies with fatal anomalies will die during labour or within minutes or hours of birth. Absolutely not. I published a paper back in 2015 which showed that some of these fatal abnormalities, although yes, most babies died, some have lived for years afterwards. But a doctor is going to be put in the position